Hello, fantastic people. I thought I would do a quick little video here to summarize in case I'm not able to be there or you want to look back on this material. So let me go ahead and jump into slideshow. And today we were asked to cover a little bit of the curriculum and what exists in our unit maps, all the way from, I guess, the start of a class, like how you would inject some do-nows, some warm-ups, the elements that are part of close reading, what's there for small groups, reteaching, and even the common formatives that might exist. So I'm going to go a little bit quickly so that we can do this in 10 minutes. Okay, the first thing that I'd point out is the do-nows that are set up in the curriculum would really be a great thing to access instead of trying to add two things, because you could be really efficient and lead into the lesson that you're about to do. Many of the beginning intro videos that exist in the early parts of the lessons are great for using to do definitions and Cornell notes. I know a lot of schools out there are doing that, but it's a good chance to make it more listen and then write down what you hear and paraphrase while you're watching these definition videos. Teachers could also pause it and then let kids catch up on each word a little bit. But again, not just copying, more so thinking about what the definitions mean and then writing them down. Immediately to follow, a lot of times people use do-nows that might start discussion. So again, that's another chance to use your writer's notebook, perhaps with a timer, and then harvesting and discussing some of those responses that we did in the do-now as a way to jump into the next part of the lesson. It's also a chance to explore background information. And the misconception might be that teachers give that to students, but what we're really helping is students to realize that they have background in a lot of ways related to the topics or things that we're going to be talking about. So it's getting students to point out what background information they may already know or have that prior knowledge. If we do that really intentionally and part of the do now, then we're going to get more buy-in and maybe even help students make sense of their previous experiences as they relate to what we're about to do. Okay, here's an example of an intro video that exists in the resource, and you can see I put some arrows to kind of indicate where exactly you might find the ways to start that in your class. But really, you play this video and it becomes not teacher-led so much, but students are involved and then ready to discuss. If I immediately have those two questions, what other images could you imagine using in this video as like a written prompt that we're going to do immediately following the video? Or if it's a written prompt that I'm asking them during the video, then, these are two things that I could make tangible. It allows students to connect and have out the right supplies in a do now and really just be in that meaningful set ready to learn. Then we would get into these next questions that say optional, but I would really require them instead of making them optional, because they're for students who need support, and the majority of our learners are going to fall in that category. So you find out what your students already know about privacy. Again, this is kind of like a do now transitioning into what we might call a warm up. And again, we're harvesting that students have a lot of background understanding and knowledge of privacy, and it's probably changing as they get older, for the better or for the worse. So very valuable way to connect with who our people really are in our classes right here as we get started in this do now. Okay, warm-ups, like I said, could be a way to feature a lot of the vocabulary. There's Mahomes and his gear. We do specific things that he is obviously really good at that helps him stay strong. So if we are used to using these warm-ups, like to get ready with vocabulary, it's really not a chance to just keep quizzing, but to get used to the words a little bit more than we did the day before, reduce our worry and stress. There could be games involved. There's one up there listed called Word Sneak. There's other word-related games that we could do interactively, so not just students by themselves, where they would then be considered kind of warmed up instead of just more quizzing. Also connecting to prior learning, what we've been doing, connected to our next goals, always has been a good practice. It still really is. But our students may not know that they know a term that we're going to start using. Like one of the examples in our readings is contemporary. That's a big word for kind of modern thought. But students might be able to talk about modern thought, and then eventually, even in the goal of the unit, is use the word contemporary in replacement for modern, and have that as another powerful word that they learn to use out in the world where they talk about how there are things that are contemporary and things that are not. So really cool divide and really cool, powerful word. Okay, warm-ups again are indicated in the lesson plans. And in this case, the warm-up might look like a vocabulary skill. It also might look like a um, kind of discussion. But on the far right, the one I put here is that you would have students practice in groups, just having a small conversation using 3 to 5 of these words, or maybe you set a goal for which ones they're going to use, and then you just go around and listen. And again, it's a chance to just warm up and demystify and worry less about the words that are coming, but also lots of clues that I hear which words maybe somebody struggles with in which class. I bet constrain would be a word that most of my students would need me to support them on. But some of the other ones, like maybe we've heard obvious a lot, just didn't know that's what it looked like or how it was spelled. Okay, close reading. The coolest thing ever. I put this little picture here. It's important to notice that if I were to explain it like this, bookends, that when we start a reading, we're kind of like on this left bookends. The first time we would call that the first read we ever read it. We would purposely teach a skill related to that reading in the middle, where you see I've indicated skill lesson and with an S possibly, because there might be more than one skill. And then again, on the far right side where it says close read second, this is like closing the lesson by having kind of the first part, the middle part, and the final part. In the close read lesson, as you see on the right over here, it's where we have analysis of text and a written response with evidence from the skill lesson. So the skill lesson itself also has a common formative that you'll see, I'll point out in the coming slide. Okay, this is a screenshot of the unit maps where you'll see this organization. This Emily Dickinson poem, we read it 2 times, once for the first read, probably more than 2 times, but 2 class session times. First read, where we read it that 1 time, and then in the middle of those 2 sessions, we teach this poetic elements and structure lesson. And that's, again, the standard that it's focused on. And again, the way that we're going to measure it is included in the way that we go about it right here. So this same exact thing is featured here, but that's what it looks like in the resource. And you can see that the skill lesson in the middle is the poetic elements and structure, kind of like I was showing you there with this bookends design. First read, skill lesson applied to that reading, close read, deeper analysis, and writing about poetic elements and structure. Okay. In small groups, I put this cool little picture over here. I like it. The idea is to eventually get to be as strong as the giant hand here, but we need smaller practice when we're in smaller group settings. We might feel less confident and we might speak up less often when we're always in big groups. So small groups really needs to be intentional, and part of the goal in the curriculum and kind of the way that the resource supports that is to see that there are text talk questions designed in every first read, where we could have students discussing these and we're walking around listening and supporting their conversations, maybe providing them sentence stems and ways to do them, specific ways that we could, practice using evidence. It's also an indication of times that students might be peer conferencing and working on pointing out specific traits about writing that they appreciate about each other, or skills that they know that they're working on. And they could ask, the real feedback in real time from their peers, and then value that feedback and apply it, kind of along the way in the project. Okay, small groups is also an intentional time for reteaching. And again, throughout the curriculum map, it calls out ways to do so in a couple of places. Okay, here's an example of the kind of small group thinking that might happen when we're even modeling for students. You can see that these timestamps here coincide with the video that we would watch, but it would really work best if students were in groups and ready to stop at that point, talk about it, and then again, I call on those groups to tell us a summary of what they talked about, just like we would do in kind of an adult setting where we do small groups first, so a lot more people will speak, and then large groups to hear what the people said and reinforce what they were talking about. Okay, same thing happens with text-dependent questions in small groups. You can see that this purple part points out exactly where to look in the text and even the responses that we should hear. But these kind of questions I would not want to do on the board for everybody, modeling them all the time, but passing them out and then going around and listening to the ownership of how they take apart these questions. Again, that would make it small group. Okay, when you're in the reteaching category, there are lessons that are called Spotlight, and they are there because we know we're going to need to do this more than just the first time, and that certain students are going to need certain things more than others. And again, you can send that out this way in digital format so that everybody has a different path and everybody has a different target. That's another really good way that the digital can be helpful in doing some reteaching and kind of pulling some small groups together based on different needs. Okay, other options this year in the spiraling idea, on the far right side, you'll see some other links like from Nearpod. You'll see, just some slideshows that teachers have submitted, and you'll see iReady, and then sometimes you'll see Flocabulary. This is an example of a lesson that I shout out to teachers that are in the curriculum maps, that when they just choose it from the curriculum maps, it would ask them if they would like to use that in Nearpod, and they can choose it and then know that that would be one more way to reteach this element. It's going to go through kind of the structures of poetry a little bit different way. And then maybe that was more effective the second time around than the way you did it the first time. Okay, common formatives are also a large part of the curriculum, and they are available for every single reading in the thematic, and they're also available in the novel study when you choose the novels that are available from the curriculum. Okay, so the first read has standard aligned quizzes for every single reading, and they are functional CFAs because they are all aligned to Missouri Learning Standards. They can also be customized. So the goal isn't to just put them out with all of the questions, but to look at them ahead of time and choose the best 4 or 5 that align with exactly what you're measuring. There might be 5 extra ones because sometimes in those little quizzes, there's predictor questions, but teachers can chop those off if they so decide, which would be a good idea, and make the quizzes smaller and then more telling about exactly how they did on one particular standard. Okay, so there are also skill lessons that I was showing you before, and those skill lessons are immediately correlated. Like you'll see at the very bottom, this is a reading related, and it says RL1A. So that means in the first read that there's a couple of standards related to the first read. This one's about supporting evidence. You'll see RL1A is down here again in the think question because this is the writing part of that same lesson. But then you'll see on RL2A, this is the skill lesson. Again, it's about Emily Dickinson's poem again. That's really helpful because we already read it and we don't need to spend the time, investing in a brand new reading. We can go back and quiz on something we already read. And we're going to quiz specifically about RL2A, which is related to poetic structure. So we know using those 2 questions, we're going to have a common measure of how students did. Okay, that ends the basic show today. Please get a hold of me for any questions or support that anybody needs on your campus. Thank you.